You are not forgettable because you are not enough. You are forgettable because you have been taught to make yourself easy to overlook. That is the thing nobody says out loud. We talk endlessly about confidence, about glow-ups, about becoming the best version of yourself, but we almost never talk about the specific, invisible habits that are quietly signaling to every room you walk into that you are okay to dismiss. Not because you are weak, not because you are not interesting, but because somewhere along the way, you learned that taking up less space was safer, that being agreeable was smarter, that waiting to be chosen was just how things work. In the next few minutes, I am going to walk you through 5 specific patterns, 5 things you are probably doing right now that are making you invisible, and I am going to tell you exactly what shifts when you stop, not in a vague, feel-good way, in a concrete, this is what actually changes way. By the time we get to the 5th one, the way you think about presence, power, and how people perceive you will not be the same. And I want to start with the one that took me the longest to see in myself. The first pattern is what I call over-explaining. And I do not mean the clinical definition. I mean the specific way you have learned to justify your decisions, your needs, and your boundaries to people who never actually asked for a justification. You cancel plans and immediately launch into a 3-paragraph explanation. You say no to something and then soften it with 5 reasons why. You make a decision about your own life and then find yourself preemptively defending it before anyone has even questioned it. The moment you stop justifying yourself to people who never ask, you become someone they have to reckon with. Here is the psychology behind it. Over-explaining is a fawn response. It is something many of us developed as children when we were in environments where our decisions were regularly questioned, criticized, or dismissed. We learned that if we gave enough reasons, we could preempt the rejection. We could control the outcome by controlling the narrative. The problem is that we carried that strategy into adulthood, into relationships and workplaces, where it no longer serves us, and instead it signals something we never intended. It signals that we do not fully believe in our own right to decide. Think about Viola Davis for a moment. She has spoken openly about growing up in poverty, about the years she spent auditioning for roles she never got, about being told she was not the right type. And what is striking, when she talks about the period when her career transformed, is that the shift was not just external, it was internal. She stopped explaining herself. She stopped softening her presence to make other people comfortable. She stopped arriving apologetically, and the rooms she walked into began to respond differently. Not because the rooms changed, but because she did. Presence is not something you perform, it is something you stop hiding. The shift here is not dramatic. It is a single decision you make before you open your mouth. I do not owe this a justification. Not said with aggression, not said with coldness, just said quietly, internally, as a fact. You will be amazed at how quickly the energy in a conversation changes when you stop making your decisions negotiable. But here's what makes this more complicated than it sounds. Because the second pattern is directly connected to this one, and it is the reason most people never fully break the first habit. The second pattern is speaking before you are ready, not in the sense of public speaking anxiety. I mean the specific habit of filling silence with words, rushing to respond, rushing to fill a pause, rushing to smooth over any moment of tension with noise. Have you ever noticed this? Someone asks you something, and before the thought is even formed, you are already talking, not because you had something important to say, but because the silence felt dangerous. Silence is not empty. It is the space where authority lives, and most people have been conditioned to give it away. There is fascinating research in the field of social psychology around how people read pauses. Studies on conversational dynamics consistently show that individuals who allow deliberate pause before responding are rated as more confident, more intelligent, and more trustworthy than those who respond immediately. This is not an accident. Our nervous systems are wired to interpret speed as anxiety and stillness as control. When you rush to fill silence, you are unconsciously communicating that the silence makes you uncomfortable, and discomfort reads as insecurity. The shift here is deliberate. Before your next important conversation, give yourself permission to take 2 full seconds before responding. It will feel like an eternity. It will feel awkward. But what it communicates to the other person is, I am not scrambling for your approval. I am thinking. That distinction is everything. And this leads directly into the third pattern, which is the one that surprises most people when they see it in themselves. The third pattern is performing relatability at the cost of distinctiveness. This is a subtle one. It shows up as the habit of constantly agreeing, constantly finding common ground, constantly mirroring whoever you are with, not because you genuinely agree, but because you have learned that being relatable makes people like you. And being liked feels safer than being yourself. I used to do this. I would sit in a room and watch myself shapeshift, adjusting my opinions, adjusting my humor, adjusting the version of myself I presented based on who was in front of me. And the exhausting irony is that I thought I was connecting. What I was actually doing was disappearing. You cannot be impossible to ignore and impossible to pin down at the same time. One of them has to give. The psychology here is rooted in what researchers call self-monitoring, the degree to which a person adjusts their behavior to match social cues. High self-monitors are socially smooth and easy to get along with, but they are also, paradoxically, less memorable because there is no consistent self to remember. When you are always mirroring, always reflecting, always agreeing, people enjoy you in the moment and forget you the moment you leave. You leave no trace. The shift here is not about being contrarian. It is about allowing your actual perspective to take up space. The next time you are in a conversation and someone says something you mildly disagree with, do not nod. Say something gently, thoughtfully, but honestly. You will notice something interesting. People do not pull away. They lean in. I want to come back to something I mentioned earlier, because what I am about to share next completely reframes everything we have covered so far. The fourth pattern is telegraphing your need for approval, and this one is particularly painful to recognize because it is so deeply embedded in the things we think are just politeness. The constant checking, does that make sense? Is that okay? Am I bothering you? The upward inflection at the end of statements that should be statements but come out sounding like questions. The laugh that appears before you have even said anything funny. The one that preemptively apologizes for taking up airtime. These are not just habits, they are signals, and they are sending a very specific message. Desperation is not just a feeling, it is a frequency. And people feel it before you say a single word. Here is what I have come to understand about approval seeking. It is not actually about the other person. It is about the story you are running in the background. The one that says, your presence requires justification, that your ideas need permission to exist, that you are only as valid as the response you receive. And when you run that story on loop, it bleeds into everything. Your posture, your pacing, your word choice, the way you enter a room, the way you leave one. There is a documented phenomenon in behavioral psychology called validation-seeking behavior. And what the research consistently shows is that the more visibly a person seeks approval, the less authority they are perceived to have, regardless of their actual competence or expertise. It is not fair, but it is real. The people who are taken most seriously are almost always the ones who appear to need the least confirmation that they should be. You were not too much. You were in a room that was too small for what you are carrying. The shift here is internal before it is external. It begins with catching the question before you ask it. Does that make sense? Replace it with silence. Let what you said stand. If they did not understand, they will ask. What you will discover is that most of the time, they understood perfectly, and that the question was never really about clarity. It was about reassurance. Stop asking for the reassurance. Let your words be enough. Which brings us to the fifth pattern, and this one, I think, is the root of all the others. The fifth pattern is treating your own time, energy, and attention as the least valuable things in any room. This shows up in the ways you respond instantly to everyone else's needs, while your own go unmet for days. In the way you make yourself endlessly available, not because you want to, but because saying no requires an explanation you have not figured out how to give yet. In the way you deprioritize your own work, your own creative output, your own rest, the moment someone else's urgency appears. And here is what that communicates, over time, to every person watching. If you do not treat your time like it matters, no one else will. When you say yes to something you do not want, you are not being kind. You are teaching that person that your no is negotiable. Here is what I want you to sit with. All 5 of these patterns have something in common. They are not personality flaws. They are not proof that you are broken or weak or somehow less than. They are learned behaviors, strategies you developed in environments where playing small was the rational choice, where being loud about your needs got you dismissed, where taking up space came with a cost. You learned to shrink because at some point, shrinking worked, but you are not in that room anymore. And the strategies that kept you safe there are the same ones keeping you invisible here.